Welcome back to another episode of Building Up Your Business, the podcast. My name is Erica Dill. I am your host with Operationally Up. Remember, we are here to build your e-commerce and consumer goods business with maximum profitability. We've got another great episode and another fantastic guest today. We are talking about HR being a strategic partner and not the policy police. And I know that a lot of you business owners are like, oh, here we go about HR. But seriously, HR is your best friend. And Tonyel is here to tell us all about it. So Tonyel Thompson is the founder of Real HR Hero, a fractional HR firm built to help leaders work with HR, not around it. With nearly 2 decades of experience, Tonyel has built HR systems from the ground up. From payroll and compliance to recruiting, leadership development, and culture. Working across industries like tech, construction, healthcare, public and nonprofit organizations known for breaking down complex HR laws into plain language with a little bit of humor. Tonyel helps growing businesses reduce risk, retain their people, and treat HR as a true strategic partner. Tonyel, I'm so glad you're here with me today.
Thanks, Erica. I'm glad to be here too.
Awesome. And like we said, today is going to be great because we're talking about all about partnership and how to prevent some of those sticky situations that you might get yourself into and how HR can help you with that. So I want to just jump right in. There are some important HR terms and policies that every business owner needs to know. We're going to talk about some of them today. And specifically, we're going to talk about ones that could end you up in a lawsuit and what those fines really are and how that can actually create more trouble for you if you don't follow them. So like one of the big ones that I hear everybody talk about, at-will employment, classification, and exemptions often are misunderstood by employers. Tonyel, why do you think that is?
Well, oftentimes the regulations are just not easy to interpret, right? And then also sometimes those regulations need time to be litigated before we can fully understand the intent behind them, right? And so when we're not at that stage yet, oftentimes we're looking at previous litigations or, similarly situated regulations and figure out how to best interpret what they are, right? And so when your specialty is not human resources or employment law, it's very hard to keep up with those items and kind of make sense of them. Also, because every situation is, different, and people tend to convince themselves that what's best for them is the answer, is how it's supposed to be, because it's not clear. So they'll have an argument of, this person should be exempt because blank, 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 right? When in all reality, the law sometimes is very clear that it's not. But from an HR perspective, you have to be able to break that down strategically to really fully understand it, to make sure that you're making the best decision. And then, really, what we see the most is people are just taking advice from the wrong people. So they might be in a mastermind or something, and another CEO said they're handling it like this, fill in the blank. But that might work for them. That might be something that's okay, that they've determined to be okay. But in your situation, it's likely not the exact same situation. So you just need somebody or people behind you that can support you and the decisions you're making for your business. So I think that's the biggest thing.
Well, and one company is not like another. They're all special little snowflakes. How many employees do you have? What type
Exactly.
of a business? What type of employees? So you may hear that there's a new minimum wage law coming across, or this company is handling it this way. But not all companies are created equal. So you can't just copy and paste into your business.
Yeah. So, and I've seen, companies are like, we start working with them. When's the last time you had your handbook updated? Oh, I don't know. 5 years ago, we got it from my friend's business, and we just created the same thing and slapped our name on it. It's like, oh yeah, so let's start over. It's not even look at that. We're just going to start all over. So, but yeah, I think really the misunderstanding typically does, though, come from just it not being easy to interpret, right? And everybody's making up their own interpretation. And we have this saying, which a lot of people use, but like we need to understand the black and white, but we live in the gray for our clients because it just depends, right? Like you have to be strategic and understand not only the things that you brought up, number of employees and all that, but even just culture matters, right? How do you handle things? How do your employees expect to be treated? There's lots of things that come into play that you might not even think of. So it's good to have somebody that can stand behind you and support that.
Well, and what a great segue to a big topic I want to talk about, because I hear it almost every company I walk into, and talking about black and white and gray, at will employment. And I want to start off here because I know I've heard it so many times that people are like, oh, it's okay because it's at will employment. But Tonyel, please tell us exactly what does it mean and what is that gray area that can happen with at will?
Yeah, sure. So essentially, at will employment is an employee or the employer has the right to end the employment for any reason as long as it's not wrongful, like in the cases of like discrimination or retaliation. And so this is why if you do have HR, you have somebody that's responsible for HR, why they still require you to have documentation or have a case behind whatever it is you're terminating for. So even if, you're laying off an employee because there's no need for their position, you still want to document your decision, how you made the decision, why it wasn't somebody else. You still want to be able to, even though it says you can, for any reason, or no reason at all, actually, the law says, but that means not what people typically think it means, right? Still cannot be wrongful. And an employer, you still, and you can even fire an employee because you don't like them, as long as it's not for, and by the way, I say that with care.
Consult your HR first.
Yes, because that would be hard to prove, because if it's, you're not going to go to court and they're going to claim, it's discrimination of some reason, you're going to be like, no, I just didn't like them. You're not going to be able to really have that argument. But there still would need to be a reason. Like, for instance, maybe they don't speak to clients as professionally as you would like them to. They're just kind of a grumpy person, and they're the front desk office person, and they, you just don't, there's nothing you can do. It's their personality. There's no discrimination behind that. However, you have to be able to prove that, right? So even though the law says for any reason or no reason, in the back end, you do want to document and have a reason for that. Can be, you would want to stand behind in a courtroom, right? So, and I've been in some situations where it was just like, we just are done with this person, just get rid of them because blank, right? And they make a business decision and they take a risk of maybe they didn't document it as much as they should and things like that. It's still a decision. It's still at will. The purpose of at will employment is that no one is forced to work and an employer has a choice for the people that work for them. That is the purpose of at will. But that doesn't mean that employers can just terminate you for any reason. So.
Well, and I think one of the things that, you're really talking about is you almost have to think when you terminate somebody, is it defensible? Because
yes.
Especially in California, any lawsuit that comes up, you're going to have to defend yourself as a company. And can you go into court and say, I did this many things with the employee and this is ultimately why we terminated them? Because that employee could say, no, you terminated me because of race or any of these other age or any of these other situations, and you have to be able as a company to prove, no, we did it because of these things. And if you don't have that proof, it's going to be very hard to defend yourself.
Yeah, even just the perceived wrongful termination is costly, because the employee goes to an employment law attorney, they're trying to figure out things, figure out what will stick. You have to defend yourself. You have to pay an attorney to respond to that situation. It still can be very costly, even if that wasn't the reason, right? Like say it really was there was a reason and it was not discriminatory or retaliatory, right? But you have to be prepared for that. If you're prepared, the less you spend on the attorney. If you have everything put together, sometimes just giving what you need to give to the employee, where the employee is presenting it to their attorney, they just disappear, right? We've been in situations where it was like, I don't have to give you all of this information, but here, lay it out for them, and the employee never comes back because now the other side knows they don't have a case, like that isn't the reason for the termination, right? And so it's really important to, when I know managers hate it when they hear like, did you document it? They feel like we're HR, we're a roadblock for them in some situations, because in their mind, it's at will. I don't need to deal with this. I don't want to have to deal with this. And it's like, yes, however, we don't want to be in a situation where you're needing to defend your feelings, because that's what's really going on here, is the manager's feelings of just not wanting to deal with the situation typically, right? So let's slow down, let's back up, let's figure things out. So, but yeah, even perceived wrongful termination can be very costly. So.
Well, and this is a great example of HR being that strategic partner and not that roadblock, like you're saying, because HR is here to protect the company and the employees. And so by forcing the documentation and going through all these steps, really what HR is saying is, we care. We don't want to see you pay fines, have to hire a lawyer, answer all these things, defend yourself. So let's be proactive in these situations and get all that documentation, so that when you go to terminate that employee, you go, here's the documentation, here's what we did, here's your response, here's all these steps. So the employee goes, well, shoot, okay.
Yeah.
You know, and now, like you said, the employee goes away. And I think that's a very strong strategic partner move.
And then also, you know, this is dual, right? So like when we're going through that process, sometimes the manager's just wrong, right? Like sometimes it is in a situation, maybe they don't like them for one reason or another, but that's not the company's culture to just terminate because you don't like them for whatever reason. Like I said, there could be that if it's customer facing or whatever, there's different reasons, but sometimes we have to backpedal and say, okay, so maybe we just move some people around. You know, some people just aren't made for each other. It's not that this person is not performing. These two just don't work well together, and that person could thrive somewhere else, right? So it's like, let's take a step back. Let's not make problems where there doesn't have to be any problems for the company, and you know, protect that employee as well, right? So
yeah.
But
what a great point, because you know, like we were talking about, HR is really here for everybody, and retention is so big, and the cost to get new employees is so expensive that if you can just shift people around and retain good employees and put them somewhere where they will shine, like that's a huge benefit.
Yeah, I mean, and if oftentimes companies have, you know, the departments are working in silos, and so they don't even really see that opportunity, right? So from an HR perspective, because we're looking at as a whole, there might be somewhere where that person can fill in a gap, and you know, maybe it is performance related and they're on some kind of like, not a performance improvement plan, because you don't want to like move somebody and be on a performance improvement plan, but like have an understanding that like they're expected to perform once they're moving to the other wherever else, right? But you know, kind of helping guide those situations. It's often easier to do when somebody from the outside is able to kind of move the pieces around and understand the pieces.
Absolutely. Well, having that third party perspective is always a good thing.
Yeah, and whether that's fractional, like we are, or internal HR, right? Like it's the best when companies and management can see HR, whether internal or fractional, as a resource, as a team player that is there to support them to succeed, right? not to make rules, not to, we're not, obviously, there needs to be structure to any system, right? So there are going to be policies and things, right? But that it isn't our goal to create policies to have control. It's to how to manage these things to create a good structure that works for that organization. So,
well, preaching to the choir as an ops person,
yeah.
I love the processes and the systems. And I always tell people these processes and systems should free you. You
Yes.
have these guides and these mile markers and everything. And now you don't have to think about it. You have a system. So all you have to do is repeat it when it gets to that. You don't think about it. It's there. You follow it. You move on. It should free you. And so many people think of it as like, nah, you're boxing me in. And it's like, no, it's giving you freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. And because it's not set in stone either. If it's not
Right.
working, we change it, right? So, but let's try it. Let's give some, real, let's just really try to do it first. And then if it doesn't
Right.
work, it's not set in stone. So,
Oh my God, I have so many topics that I want to go down, but I want to make sure we
Mhm.
get a few more because I want to make so many comments, but I'll hold
Okay.
them.
Okay.
So hopefully we get back to it later. There's just so much to talk about, and I want so many things to go down. But one of the other things I want to touch on is 1099s.
Yes.
For those of you listening, Tonyel and I are in California, so this is a very interesting place to be doing HR in, and I praise Tonyel for having the knowledge and the experience to do it here in California. But a lot of times when startup companies and small businesses are growing, they look at the cost of bringing on an employee and they're like, oh my gosh, that's so expensive. So maybe I just make them 1099. Tonyel, what is the risk of them doing that?
So at a high level, an IRS audit, class action lawsuits, that come with hefty fines and penalties and possibly back pay of overtime and PTO and taxes. But also things like, insurance policies and unforeseen business interruptions because, with if it's misclassification, some things can happen. But then also there's, even if you know that you're doing this and that it's wrong and they can prove that, there could even be criminal charges attached to doing
Really?
misclassification. And that's because it's really looked at as fraud, right? Because you're not paying your employer taxes, you're not giving your employees the benefits and things that they're due, the job protections that come with being a W-2 employee. So it could end up as criminal. But I actually haven't been involved in anything that's turned criminal, because oftentimes people are trying to fix it, but it's a real possibility that it could.
Wow.
So, yeah,
Well,
so I think that's
so
probably the risk.
I know, I don't want to spoil the secret, but I know there are some very specific tests and everything.
Yeah.
So how can we determine if someone can truly be classified as an independent contractor?
Okay, so first I'm going to get this out there is that a company is liable for getting this right, not the worker. So just want to make sure that is brought up. So there is, in summary, if you treat the worker like an employee, they're an employee. And in California and several other states, there's what they call an ABC test. And I'll go over that. But then the federal government also has their own test, Barillo test. That's a little bit more lax, but it's still the same thing. If you're treating them like an employee, they are an employee, right? And in California, the ABC test is, so there's 3 items really that they feel like everything's wrapped up. If they don't fall in these, then they are defaulted into being a W-2 employee. So they have freedom of control, which means they're given a job to do, but how they accomplish that job is up to them. If you have specific, policies and procedures and must-haves and things that you're treating like they are an employee, then they're an employee, right? Also, if one of the things you have to realize is they should be, an independent contractor should be able to hire somebody else to do the work and it not be under your control. I mean, maybe notified, right? Like you could say, okay, I'm doing a recruiting job for you and I'm the one that's working on that, but I'm going to hire this recruiter to do the work because I'm going on vacation. So they're going to have access to your Asana board during that time, blah, blah, blah. That should be allowed. That should be okay to do as an independent contractor, right? If you then go, no, I need to interview the person and I need to do a background check, and these are employment conversations you're having, right? So that's one, A. So B is it must be outside of the company's course of business. So if, for instance, an accounting firm can't hire accountants as independent contractors, right? Like even if they're typically, like I typically work as an independent contractor, I want to be one, that's just not, it's in the same, they're doing the same thing, right? So you can hire me as an HR consulting, even though typically companies can have HR internally, it's not their in course of business.
They're not HR companies, they're doing another service as their business, and this is a support role.
Right. And C, engaged in an established trade. So they're licensed, they're insured, they're able to advertise and offer the same services to other companies. So if all three of those are covered, then they could be an independent contractor in California. So oftentimes these are either just completely ignored or totally misunderstood. And one of the things that I tell clients when I'm talking to about this is the DOL has said that when cases come to them of misclassification of a 1099, 95% of the time they determine that they were misclassified and need to be reclassified.
Really?
Yeah. So
it's misunderstood that much.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, yes, I think it's 50-50. It's ignored. Okay. In this industry, we do it. I don't know why they're saying we can't, but in the industry, everyone does this. So they just completely ignore the the laws, the regulations, or they try to make their argument fit in between the ABC somehow.
Well, and it has to be all three, not one.
Yes.
And okay.
Yes, all three. Yep.
So we're talking about, and I know that there are some very, very big cases, especially here in California, of misclassifications. But do you have an example of one that you can share?
Yeah, so earlier this year in October, there was a case that ended with a $10 million case where an in-home care company misclassified their employees as 1099s, and so they were nurses and things, right? And so they were denying them their overtime benefits, their other benefits just come in as regarding an employee, but also labor protections. And then because they were considering them independent contractors, they had like a non-poaching, like you can't try to steal customers and all of this stuff. Well, when you're an employee, you can't, there's certain rules you can't have in place. There's certain protections, but now since they were misclassified, that also kind of was tagged along in there as non-poaching. They had a non-poaching agreement that was not allowed. So $10 million can put you, like, can just wipe you out, and it's, a lot of that probably was in penalties and things, right? But, a lot of it was also in the back pay that employees should have been just getting overtime, right?
Right. Well, not to mention the legal fees. I mean, that's just the settlement. I mean, the legal fees to go through, like, an audit, and I know, and not to step on your toes there, but like when you're doing that, if you're going through time and labor and pay stubs and records, do you know how much legal fees? I mean, that's an insane amount of money on top of the $10 million settlement.
Yeah, and I think this was, if I remember correctly, thousands of employees. This wasn't like, it wasn't a large organization, but over time, because I think that they look back 4 or 5 years, right? So over time, that can be a lot of people in that class action lawsuit. So, So, I
Well,
mean,
and
again,
just
this
to
could wipe
bring
them
it
out.
down
Wipe them out.
for smaller businesses, even if you have, let's say you've got 10 people in your company, and you look back 4 to 5 years, and you look back at, let's say they're assemblers, or maybe they're installers, and you have them as 1099, and you've got 9 over the last 4 or 5 years. Just doing the audit of 4 or 5 years worth of data for 9 people,
Mm-hmm.
and like you're saying, that could be a class action if they all band together.
Mm-hmm.
That gets expensive pretty quickly.
Yeah, and like, in California specifically, so if these people are no longer working for you too, there's all these other penalties that get tacked into there of like, waiting time penalties. So like you didn't pay them all the overtime. So not only do you have to pay them their overtime, you owe them a penalty for not paying their final wages when they quit the company. I mean, like there's all these things that can just add up on top of that. And the one thing I always, when clients are asking the questions about 1099s, and it is my advice that this person or people are not 1099s. I always tell them it is your business decision. You can have an argument. You would be able to argue your case, but is this worth it? Would that be worth it in the end to hire these people as 1099s versus W2s? Why not just do it right from the beginning? And when I say right, they're like, oftentimes they're like, I think I'm right. And it's like, okay, well,
I'm sure you do.
so it's like, okay, well, why not be safe, right?
Right.
I always tell, the default of hiring a worker should always be as a W-2. You should then prove that they're an independent contractor. So now why not just stay in the safe zone for these one person? Sometimes it's just one person. Sometimes so it's like just be in the safe zone and hire them as a W-2. So, and again, we're not in it to make the decisions for them. We're in it to help them make the best decision for them, right?
Well,
So,
and I always think about these types of topics, and whenever I work with business owners, a lot of these business decisions are mitigating risk, right? You can
yeah.
make whatever decision you want at a
Mhm.
certain level of assuming risk. So
Right.
whenever you're thinking about these HR laws, you need to know all the information, the potential lawsuits, the potential fines, and then you have to decide what level of risk you're willing to take.
Right.
And, Tanyel, from what you're saying, I think you kind of think of it a similar way that I do, where it's like we're here to guide you down a path and advise and give information. And at the end, it's your decision of how much risk you're willing to take on. And I think
Exactly.
in the HR world, that really applies.
Yeah. And that's the difference also of having fractional HR is that is how we move, right? We're not, you are the decision, so internal HR oftentimes will stick their, will plant their feet and be like,
On the ground.
you must, I mean, there are certain situations where we're going to be like, this is the wrong decision, but it's not our decision to make. But
Right.
internal HR might really try to be that roadblock. We're just going to move on, right? Oftentimes, and we've given them all of the information that they need to make the decision for their organization, and that's all we can do, right? So that's kind of the difference between having fractional, I think, and internal HR sometimes in these situations. So.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that goes along with 1099s is, okay, so you've decided to hire this person as a W-2, and now you have to decide, are they going to be exempt or non-exempt? And so many people are like, ooh, exempt is salary and non-exempt is hourly. Let's get the real answer, Tanyel. Lay it on us.
I mean, essentially, the general explanation is that non-exempt is hourly and entitled to all kinds of protections and entitled to overtime. Exempt are usually very experienced, and I'm gonna do quotations, professionals, because one of the determinations is a professional, but is an experienced professional with a fixed salary regardless the number of hours worked, and they are not entitled to overtime because it's looked at as more of like a quality of work versus quantity of hours, right, for an exempt, because they're an experienced professional. And so they're so yes, what people say, that is in fact right, but there's rules in order to get there, right? Like, you don't just get to say, oh, because they're not going to work very much, I'm going to pay them, this flat salary. They're only going to work a couple hours a week, but I'm just going to pay them this flat salary, right? Like, there's sometimes the reasons behind why people decide to be exempt is just, they just don't understand. They just don't know. They don't know what they don't know oftentimes. So
Sure. So we're talking about, I think you mentioned that there's some categories, and you said one of them was professional. What are those tests or those categories in order to be exempt?
So there is administrative, executive, professional, outside sales, and I feel like I'm missing one. And then in California, they also have computer professional. And all of these categories have a different test, but they all have a minimum salary that must be paid. And typically that is, and I say typically because computer professional is outside of this, but typically that's going to be 2 times the minimum wage, whatever the minimum wage is, right? And I want to, this is kind of off subject, but I have an attorney friend that I work with, and they're like, that threshold of 2 times minimum wage, if the person is close to that, if they're willing to accept the salary that's close to that threshold, they're probably actually not exempt. Because these are typically highly paid professionals that have great salary packages, typically because you're paying for the quality or the outcome of their work versus just task-oriented job of hourly, right? So most of the time they are going to be paid more than that. So there's the salary test, and then there is the job test, right? So depending on what they do, and typically across the board, these positions need to have independent judgment over like matters of significance in their role, right? And that doesn't mean that they're the final decision maker, but that means they can participate in making decisions for their people as an executive, in the executive classification, or say for instance in professional, they are the expert in whatever that profession is, and so people are going to them to make the decisions, right? Like they're the expert. Or administrative, that's the one that's usually gets most misunderstood.
Misused, yeah.
Is the administrative, because we all think of like your administrative assistant. Okay, well, I just want them to answer my calls whenever I want them to, so I'm going to put them as an exempt. But no, they have to be, almost, say for instance, a senior executive assistant that is actually can stand in for the CEO in certain situations and make decisions, then possibly that position could be exempt, right? And so that's kind of a summary of a couple of them, but it's again, there's one of those things that you just need to document. You need to go, this is why for this position we've made this decision, and really kind of strategically understand why you believe, and have somebody that can be the devil's advocate going, no, that's not really what's going on here. And in regards to the case we talked about, the $1 million or $10 million case, in-home care, they were nurses, and the actual professional classification says nurses are not included. It specifically says nurses are not, right? And so even though they're licensed and they have, they are a professional, yes, they are not considered in this situation. So you just really have to have somebody that's going to be that devil's advocate to keep you out of trouble. These are exempt and non-exempt is probably the biggest thing. If an employee, no matter reason why they go to an employment law attorney, even if it's like, oh, I was discriminated against, I think they terminated me because I'm, this race, they're going to say, hold up, how are you paid? They're going to say, just wait a minute, let's pin that. How are you paid? Because this is oftentimes where people are making the mistake and it's not even known to them sometimes, right? And so even in cases
Well,
where
and
it's
that's where those
distribution, they'll ask for your payroll records and stuff for that.
Yeah. Well, and that's where those fines rack up because in
Mhm.
California you've got the EDD. So if you were not paid overtime, and or you were supposed to be hourly and there's no time clock, and you're just getting paid a flat dollar amount a day, it's I think you owe a fine to EDD as well. Is that right?
Well, I mean, it's because you didn't pay them. So you're really
Gotcha.
getting a penalty for not paying the person. So yes, that penalty typically goes to the EDD.
Wow.
But in a lawsuit, if it's turned into a lawsuit, it's not like you pay the EDD and you pay
Okay.
the employees. It oftentimes is bundled together and
It's
dealt
bundled
with
together.
together. Yeah, but there are things that if you think they're exempt, there's all of these things. So like in California and other places, meal period penalties. If you're not
Yes.
tracking their time, you don't know that whether they took the meal period when they were supposed to, right? So there's all of these things that just can be tacked onto it. And if you're in your mind you're considering them as not exempt and we don't need to track their hours, they can say anything. They can then when it comes down to it, they can say, "I worked 12-hour days every day,
No
and they only
break, no
worked
lunch,
6."
no
Yeah,
nothing.
they will be able to. If you weren't tracking it, they will be able to say anything.
And
So
going
it's
back to our earlier statement of you can't defend yourself.
yeah, yeah, it just
Well,
is.
and for those of
Oh,
you in California, the break and lunch laws and or meal break laws are very strict, even down to like when that break is taken.
mm-hmm.
So make sure you're
Yep,
paying attention and using that time clock.
yeah,
Oh my gosh, so many questions. We're running
yeah,
short on time. I want to get to two more.
mm-hmm.
One that I think is super important for um, small businesses that are growing. How do they create and introduce these policies that can be cumbersome as far as tracking time and labor and classification? So, how do they do this without losing their culture and becoming too bureaucratic? What tips do you have?
So you know, if so when we're going into clients that are loose, we'll say, on some of these things, it's slowly. We do an assessment and then we do a gap analysis and we prioritize the things that like absolutely need to fix this immediately. And then sometimes there's like, things that are we can gradually do over time, fix things over time. But the it's always about presentation when you're how you present it to your employees about what your intention is. um, and not everybody will believe you. I mean, it really depends on what culture we're going in to support, right? But
Sure.
if your intention really is to do it right and to ensure that you're doing the things you're supposed to be doing for your employees and that's the way you're communicating it, and yes, there are going to be some structure in place versus calling it policies and things
Sure.
that are not set in stone. We still want flexibility with certain things, so definitely have conversations with HR or your manager about concerns you have with the changes that are being made. It's all about presentation, right? And so we help strategically with supporting the communication of how these things are implemented and in what order and what pace and how aggressively. So I mean, we still have clients that we're not doing like the meal period, like we're tracking it at all, and it's like some things we just
You
you
have
just
to
have
do.
to. You're just doing it,
Sorry.
right?
Gotta do it.
So,
Rip the band-aid off.
um, yeah. So, and so most of the time we'll start with something that's a little bit more gentle first to get, the taste of having HR looking at things and then jump on some other things. But again, it's really about how you come about it, how you
Framing.
go about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I always like to leave our episodes with one big nugget that our listeners can take away and implement in their business today. What is that policy or practice that if somebody called you up and they said, I've got time for one thing, what is that one thing?
Um, I think that understanding your culture and what you're trying to do, what your values are, not just your own values to your clients and to your customers, but your values are internally, and understanding that, and then looking back at your team and really attempting to be as flexible as you can when it comes to the policies that you put in place, right? Like understanding what is absolutely necessary for your business to operate successfully, and what maybe you're just always have been used to doing, right? So it's really kind of taking a step back, and it's bigger than just policy creating or knowing what rules you're supposed to be or what regulations you're supposed to be following. If you take a step back and you have a strategy in place to follow your values when it comes to your employees, oftentimes all of that other stuff will fix itself. So, or when it does need to be fixed, your employees that are still there, hopefully, will be ready for it and will be engaged and really support the decisions and the changes and all of that. So I think it's really kind of looking at the culture and where you want to go as a business and working from there. It's hard when you say what policy would you focus on, because it really depends. So there's not an answer for that, because it really depends what their goals are.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and we didn't even, like I said, there's so many things we could touch on today.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we didn't really get to talk about is culture. And if you have that culture of putting the team member first and focusing
Mm-hmm.
on that team involvement and the company taking care of everybody, a lot of these things, like we were talking about, is framing, right? So a lot of these things can be framed of like, this is how we take care of the team and protect you and just create a better environment. And like you said, those things can then fall into place.
Yeah. Yep.
I love that. What a great way to end the episode on. Fantastic. Tonyel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's been another wonderful episode of Building Up Your Business, the podcast. I am Erica Dill, your host with Operationally Up. We are here every 2 weeks, and you can find us with another episode soon. So please come back and listen to us again. And until then, have a wonderful day. Great!